Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in this amazing session. Today, we'll be talking about a great topic that is sustainability going forward with Capgemini and Salesforce. For us, every organization should be putting this topic a top priority for their business going forward. I believe if you don't have a climate plan, you don't have a business plan for the future. My name is Paulo Silva, and I will be your host for today's session. Some quick notes before we move on. We'll record the session and later share with you. Your mics will be muted, and for any questions, please use chat or the Q&A. We'll be monitoring the chat, and we will reply to you as soon as possible. At the end, we'll have a Q&A, so let's kick off with our main speakers. Maxime and Arthur will start and share Capgemini point of view about sustainability. Then we'll move to Connor, and Connor will present Salesforce Sustainability Cloud. So let me hand over to Maxime. Maxime, the floor is yours. You can now share your screen. We are
Great. So hello,
seeing.
everyone. My name is Maxime Waika. I'm a member of Capgemini Group's sustainability offering portfolio team. And my role is basically coordinating and supporting our teams across Capgemini to help our clients deliver their own net zero transformations. And that includes obviously global multidisciplinary teams leading sustainability initiatives and projects based on a great variety of both sectorial, so from financial sectors to automotive, aeronautics, and so on, but also functional areas of expertise, such as consulting, engineering, developments, cloud, etc. And so what I would like to start with is remind us all collectively the challenge we are currently facing. Basically, we are in front of an undeniable need to collectively tackle the climate change. And two figures to illustrate the urgency that we are talking about. 7% first is the decrease in CO2 equivalent emissions that we will need every single year until 2030 to maintain our global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But 7% is also the decrease in CO2 equivalent emissions induced last year by the pandemic. So clearly what we see is that stopping all our activities globally is not enough and is not sustainable enough to curb that climate change. And we need to do it differently, and we need to do it now since there is not much time left. And so that cannot be done without the global organizations, which have a role to play in that transition. And plus, we cannot hide behind carbon offsets anymore because they are not a viable option anymore, either environmentally, but also economically speaking, since it is forecasted that these offsets and their price will increase tenfold by 2030. So in that overall context, global companies have already challenged by their ecosystems. The ecosystems is customers. So customers, we see that a vast majority already would pay a premium for products and services that can prove consistent traceability across the value chain. Ecosystem means regulators as well. We'll see an increasing number of regulations, laws, constraints that will require organizations to adapt. We can mention here the CSRD, for instance, directive. Investors as well. So more than 60% already use ESG ratings as part of their investment case in 2020. Ecosystem means partners as well. We know the importance and the significant role that procurement since scope 3, so upstream, represent for organizations. And actually, a vast majority of procurement organizations state that their commitment to sustainable procurement has increased over the past years. And finally, ecosystem means employees. And employees, here we can see that a lot of Gen Z and millennials are more likely to work for a company that has a strong green footprint. But even if all that pressure is going on, we believe that that can be turned into many opportunities since we see a lot of investments coming from, for instance, in the United States, Biden administrations over the next 8 years. Actually, it will represent $1 trillion to tackle the climate crisis globally and cut greenhouse gases emissions. So all that will represent investments and will be able to foster innovations thanks to those challenges that we will be collectively facing. So in that context, organizations have started to size the net zero transition, but they face several difficulties. And we have seen that. First, they often commit, but still lack complete strategies. So the vast majority of our key clients have set those carbon neutral targets, but other figures show that only few of those targets actually meet criteria for a credible net zero plan. So that's the first pillar. The second big challenge is that those organizations not always are able to scale those sustainability initiatives. So if we take IT as an example and as a capability which impacts need to be reduced, we have published a report recently on sustainable IT that show that only a small part actually of organizations have taken concrete measures to reduce the IT-related impact on the environment. And the third challenge is that organizations are not able to measure their end-to-end environmental impacts. So they struggle to calculate, first monitor, and then report those impacts of their activities across the value chain and on all scopes, so from 1 to 3. So having that said, as a global corporation, Capgemini, we have set two major objectives for the years to come. The first being to be carbon neutral for our own operation by 2025 and become fully net zero organization by 2030. And that will be delivered through a reduction of scope 1 and 2 emissions, through massive reduction of our office emissions, but also improvement of the energy efficiency in those offices, and also reducing our scope 3 emissions from business travel, employee commuting, and purchased goods and services. So that's on the one hand. And on the other hand, we believe that we can have the most positive impact on the planet by supporting our clients all along their net zero journeys. So we've seen that some of them are generating up to 100 times more GHG emissions than we do, since we are a service company. And that's why we aim to support those customers and clients across their net zero journey. So we have set up a framework to actually support those net zero journey. And our goal is to deliver net zero transformations from commitment to sustainable achievements, while focusing our efforts on the roadblocks I mentioned before. So first, we want to help organizations commit by defining their net zero strategies, designing new business models accordingly, defining transformation path, but also integrating the relevant stakeholders, either internally or externally. And on that one, Arthur will say more just after. Secondly, we want to help them act by designing sustainable products, services, by implementing sustainable end-to-end operations from manufacturing to supply chain, and also running sustainable IT capabilities. And finally, we want to help them monitor and report those impacts by instilling data into their sustainable transformations, by modeling environmental impacts and climate scenarios, reporting ESG criteria, but also enabling sustainable AI. So having that global framework set, I will now let Arthur walk you through our commit pillar, which is focusing on designing the right targets and path to reach those net zero ambitions for our clients. So Arthur, the floor is yours.
I hope you are well. My name is Arthur Arrighi. I'm a director within Capgemini Invent. So Capgemini Invent is the strategy and the business.
E na sequência da realização da primeira reunião do I9 e da WC no final de junho.
Sorry. Capgemini Invent is the strategy and business consulting brand of the group Capgemini. I'm a director within Invent and working exclusively on sustainability and energy transition topic. Today, after the intro from Maxime, I will share with you what we do in terms of strategy consulting when it comes to climate strategies. So the first building block that Maxime shared with you is the strategic pillar, meaning how does a corporate commit, engage, and will change its business model in order to be compliant with a net zero strategy. It's actually quite strong because in many cases, being compliant with the Paris Agreement is not just a matter of reducing CO2 emissions. So it's not just like being more efficient in the way we consume resources, we consume power or materials, but it's also how I will change my business model so that I can support the transition and that my business still exists in the decades to come. If I take a very simple example, when we look at the mining sector, for instance, we know that there will be a drop in the coal mining sector because there are many regions that are engaged in reducing their exposure to coal consumption. But on the other hand, we know that there will be a surge, a very huge increase of new minerals to be mined, and notably metals that will be used in the energy transition. It can be nickel, it can be lithium, of course, for the batteries, manganese, copper, and so on. So when we look at mining companies, they will have also to pivot the product that they sell to support this energy transition. Today, when we look at it from a strategy perspective, there are three main topics that we look at. The first is how can I commit, how can I define and design a roadmap for my company in terms of CO2 emission reduction. The second is about the engagement. How can I engage my employees, my internal stakeholders, but also my external stakeholders, can be clients, NGO, regulators, in order to support my transformation. And the third part, as I mentioned before, is the development of new business model. And today I will be really focusing on the first part, which what we call the net zero path, which is really how to design my roadmap and ensure that my roadmap is credible and it's not just a pledge that I say to my investor, but it actually leads to a transformation. And for that, we usually split it in 4 axes of work. The first one is the definition of the vision, meaning, okay, I want to reduce my CO2 emissions, but at what pace? What scenario of the Paris Agreement I want to follow? Is it a 1.5 degrees? Is it a 2 degrees? Is it well below 2 degrees? So we help our clients in designing, in visioning this trajectory. And then, of course, we look at how can we do it? What is the impact, my operational impact? How I will actually decarbonize my activities? What are the decarbonization levers that I can use beyond energy efficiency, green energy sourcing, redesign of my supply and logistics, and so on. The second part is, and it's absolutely crucial, it's the right governance and organization for my climate program. We know that this kind of programs of CO2 reduction is by design extremely cross-cutting through organization. To be frank, there is no function, no directions within a company, within an organization that is not impacted by climate change and that has not a role to play in the CO2 emissions cut. So it can be HR, procurement, operations, strategy, CSR, whoever, everyone has a role to play. And so that's why we need a very clear and strong organization and governance around this climate program. And that's what we help our clients to design. And then we have 2 main focus because we know that it has a very significant impact on CO2 emissions. First one is around the green power sourcing strategy. In many cases, notably for industrial players, green power is a very efficient way to reduce CO2 emissions. But there are also, we appreciate the fact that there are thousands of mechanisms that exist, depending on the regions, depending on the industrial assets that you have. And so these different mechanisms have different environmental value, carbon value, but also different impact on your economics. So we help our clients in designing these green power sourcing strategies, meaning that if I want to commit to be 100% powered by renewable by 2025 or 2030, what are the different scenarios that I can use, and what are also the impacts in terms of savings, both in terms of energy, CO2, but also in terms of money. And we, beyond this strategy design, we also actually help the implementation. Notably, we work a lot on corporate PPS strategy and implementation. And the fourth pillar is regarding two topics. The first is carbon pricing. Carbon pricing, internal carbon pricing, is a very interesting tool to support the transformation and to accelerate the transformation. Yet there are many, many ways to integrate the carbon pricing within a company. So we help our clients in defining this strategy. We can, again, there are many different ways to do carbon pricing. And depending on the organization of the companies and their usual CapEx process, for instance, we will implement different carbon pricing operating models. And the last pillar is the carbon offset. And as Maxime mentioned before, carbon offset is not a solution. It is a contribution once a company has significantly reduced its emissions. It's a way to say that the company can be what we call net zero, but it really comes at the end. And this carbon offset strategy can also support some very interesting business activities. So we support our clients in identifying also the business upside of these carbon offsets. It's not just a matter of having the good ideas and working traditionally with our business capabilities. It's also about the methods, the approaches, the tools, and the benchmark that we have developed recently that enable us to really accelerate the transformation for our clients. So that's, we share here a few examples. An interesting one is the one that you see, the Capgemini Carbon Calculator. It's a tool that we designed a few years ago for two purposes. The first one is to identify the CO2 emission, our own CO2 emissions when we deliver a project, in order to see how we can optimize these CO2 emissions. For instance, by shifting from aircraft to train and so on, or from usual cars to electric cars. But it is also a way for us to have a first assessment of the CO2 emissions that we can reduce with a project within the client premises. So when we work, for instance, on a cloud migration, or when we look at redesigning the supply chain of a client, this carbon calculator enables us to have a first assessment of the CO2 that can be saved. Yet it is just a first assessment, and the question around the monitoring of it and how to follow the CO2 emission is more a topic that we can typically address with Salesforce, and that they will present just after me. And the last part is we also appreciate the fact that if we have a lot of content on all this topic, we have a lot of conviction, it is important for us to share that publicly. So that's why we publish very frequently, I would say once per month approximately, our convictions and findings around sustainability and climate pledges. Maybe a zoom that I can do is on the Fit for Net Zero report that you see in the middle. Fit for Net Zero is a report that we did that was it was Bill Gates that asked us to work on that. It is the identification and assessment of 55 technologies that will support Europe in order to reach the carbon neutrality by 2050, and notably the first milestone, which is the reduction by 55% of their CO2 emission by 2030. And you probably saw very recently the Fit for 55 package from the Europe that set this ambition. This report is completely public. You can find it online, and it describes these 55 technologies on the 5 domains, which are the buildings, energy, industry, transport, and agriculture, which are the most emitting sectors. And we see for each of these technology what are the key success factors, what are the impact in terms of investment that we should put today on the table, but what are the potential market that it will address, and also the CO2 that will be saved, and the jobs that can be created thanks to these technologies. So that's all for my side, and I will let Connor from Salesforce take it from here to present how we can track these emissions.
There you go.
Perfect. Thank you, Paolo. Thank you, Arthur. So good morning, everybody. My name's Connor Lawler. I'm a cloud architect here with Salesforce. So today I just want to bring you through Sustainability Cloud. Okay. So one of the key things that we just heard is that companies nowadays lack insight into their carbon footprint. So understanding their energy use in terms of what their buildings are consuming, what their employees are creating in terms of corporate-based travel, and then also things like their value chain spend, so purchased goods and services. So how is that impacted in terms of carbon accounting, and how do you manage that? And the idea is that with a platform like Salesforce, we've built out Sustainability Cloud to deliver a single source of truth, allowing businesses to provide investor-grade reporting, but also providing actionable based insights. Because one of the challenges companies have is when they have all this data coming in, potentially managing it in spreadsheets and maybe doing it on an annual basis, makes it more difficult to react to it. If we take a look at what Sustainability Cloud it is, because it's built on Salesforce, it's, we talk about it being a trusted platform that allows you to have auditable processes in terms of carbon accounting. It shows, we out of the box, you get various different emission factor data, which allows you to take in those energy use records and convert that into tons of CO2 equivalent, and then have really immersive dashboards to understand and deliver that data-driven insight. But the key thing about it being an auditable process is that obviously, there's a forensic log of the various different transactions, but again, it can be shared with external auditors as well that can validate it against things like your utility bills to ensure that it is accurate. And also, allowing you to share this information amongst your teams empowers them to modify their behavior and understand the impact that it's having too. One of the things, though, about Salesforce is that not only do we, preach sustainability, but we also walk the walk in terms of, we're committed to net zero and carbon neutrality. We obviously are focused on renewable energy sources for both our first-party data centers and also our third-party data centers where appropriate. We're committed to global reforestation with regards to the 100 million trees, but also how we supply chain. And we're committed to seeing 60% of Salesforce suppliers supporting science-based targets by FY25. And again, our real estate is also committed to green energy, and we have some of the most sustainable buildings in the world. So just to kind of continue upon this, we also use Sustainability Cloud to deliver the information that's delivered as part of our stakeholder impact report. And this comes out in our annual report every year. And one of the things is how we use it to influence our suppliers to commit to science-based targets as well. So, sorry. One of the things then is when we go in and take a look in at the demo, we'll get an idea how you're able to understand your energy consumption and utilization, compare it across, different assets, whether that's fleet vehicles, whether it's different buildings, and it allows you to understand that information, prioritize energy savings, but also, focus on impactful projects as well. And when we talk about it, being able to drive impactful insight, being able to compare utilization information year on year, see how you're progressing with reducing your carbon footprint, but also because you can share that information and with your suppliers and with your vendors, you can help them, address and improve performance too. So just to kind of the genesis of Sustainability Cloud is that Salesforce ourselves had this exact same problem as every large business has in terms of managing our carbon accounting. and managing it on spreadsheets. So Shengen Su, who was the sustainability program manager, said there must be a better way. And that was how Sustainability Cloud evolved from moving data from spreadsheets to actually building the application within the Salesforce platform that allows you to integrate information from your utility providers, whether either using the data loader or something like MuleSoft, to automate that process. Then, calculating what that equates to in terms of CO2 emissions, and producing those reports that can be shared and externally audited as well. So with that, we're going to kick into a demo. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour based upon time, but we're happy to take any further questions after this, or if anybody wants a more detailed demo, just contact Paolo, and that can be arranged as well. Okay, so now we're going to look at Salesforce Sustainability Cloud and show you how companies can use it to streamline data collection, enable analysis, and simplify reporting when it comes to carbon accounting. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to adopt the persona of Paulo Esteves, who is a sustainability manager with a large company. For those of you that may not be familiar with Salesforce, Sustainability Cloud is available as an application in Salesforce using the application launcher here. So Paulo starts off his day here on the homepage of Sustainability Cloud, where he can see his climate action dashboard. And this gives him an overview of the total carbon footprint for all the different aspects of his business. Again, you can do things like filter it based upon a region if you want to drill down specifically to see what's happening in EMEA, for example. And again, all the aspects of the information will break down, and you can drill into these things a little bit more, moving between things like market-based emissions versus location-based emissions, how his information is, how his energy utilization is done in terms of renewable energy, for example, geothermal, solar, wind, and so on. But if we want to take a more holistic view of that information, we can get a breakdown as to the various different emissions by scope. So scope 1 emissions are all the direct emissions from a business. Examples include things like fuel combustion, refrigerant leakage, and so on. The scope 2 emissions are all indirect emissions from purchased or acquired energy. So examples would be electricity and heat. And then also we can actually help you reporting on scope 3 emissions, and which are basically indirect emissions is that are part that a business utilizes as parts of its value chain. This can include things such as business travel and the use of sold products. So basically, Salesforce Sustainability Cloud can help you with your upstream scope 3 emissions. But because it's built on the Salesforce platform, if we look over here, we have different platform features. For example, Paolo has a task today to complete the carbon footprint for the Wolf Point Plaza office. And again, you can allow people within the business to collaborate around various different aspects of your carbon accounting. If I scroll down here a little bit, we can see that we have a data gap identified for Wolf Plaza, and we'll look into that a little bit more as well. And then also things like any utilization records that need allocation, that it'll draw our attention to this. So basically energy utilization records that are associated with a building that have not been allocated to a carbon footprint record. So that brings us nicely to our carbon footprints. So when I click on the carbon footprint object in Salesforce, we can see it broken down using this nice Kanban view based upon asset type. So for example, commercial buildings, data centers. For scope 3, we can look at our procurement, carbon footprints, travel, and so on. With this Kanban view, we can drag different carbon footprints between various different stages that will models how you want to bring them through the whole process, from data collection to gap filling to validation, all the way up to both internal and external audits. So as you see, when I move these objects between the various different stages, the information, which is the summary data, automatically updates. But let's take a look at our commercial buildings, and with that I can see that I have Wolf Point Plaza here that needs data gap filling. So when I click into that record, this actually shows me that carbon footprint for a specific period of this building. Again, it's related to the organizational asset, which is the building record in Salesforce. We can set the various different stages as to where it is, the report period, building details, what CBEX intensity record it's using, and so on. Okay, right down here to the breakdown in terms of tons of CO2 equivalent that this building is actually consuming for that period. Now, one of the things I want to do here is actually fill the data gap analysis. And this is a nice feature of Sustainability Cloud that allows you to actually quickly and easily fill any missing data by using intelligent estimates as to to update where those gaps exist. One of the things it will actually tell me is that we have a number of date issues if I want to fix that, or I can skip that too. So next thing I'm going to do is to select the data gap analysis and then choose save. And again, depending on what fill method, whether it's building benchmark, CBEX benchmark, daily averages for this year, and then maybe I'm going to set it to diesel consumption or fuel consumption. And again, you'll see that it takes that information. If I click on that option and choose save, this will go off and update that energy use record for that specific period, and saves me a lot of time and trouble. So once I did that, you may have seen that the energy use record updated here with the relevant information. And if I look at my related logs, I can see that I also have the data gap filling analysis for when it was done. Okay. So that's basically a quick overview of doing the carbon footprint, and we can see the individual items. Now let's move on to taking a look at how we handle scope 3 emissions, and with this I'm going to show you our scope 3 hub. So this scope 3 hub uses the EEIO, or environmentally extended input-output emission factors, and again it comes preloaded with a data set. You also have the ability to bring in your own data sets should you so wish, and again this can be used to work out the estimates as to what your scope 3 emissions are in terms of consumption of these services as part of your value chain. And with this wizard, you can, it brings you through a guided process that brings you the whole way through managing those data sets, creating your carbon footprint record, that is going to be associated as literally the sum up of all the various different items that you as a business consumes over that period. You can also even manage suppliers as to the people that are providing you with these products or services that are part of your supply chain, all the way down to your procurement management data set. So as I said, we have this data set in there. If I want to go in and manage that data center, I just click on that. It will bring in my operational spend for FY, or for calendar year 21, and I can see how many entry counts and what needs to be completed. So if I want to match this with emissions factors, I can just click in here. One of the nice things Sustainability Cloud does is it allows you to group that procurement data based upon different categories, so that again it can bring all those line items or group all those line items to make it far more consumable. So when I do this, one of the things I can take a look at here is that in this procurement data set, I have something that possibly needs to be updating. So for example, coffee here has been matched as business travel and air transportation, which obviously is incorrect. So if I want to modify that, again, one thing to show is that we do have the ability to look at matched and unmatched items quickly and easily, and then to drill them down and compress them for allocation purposes. So I'm going to select this one, and I'm going to say that it's actually a purchased good and a service, and then it is coffee. So coffee and tea manufacturing. And then it will tell me the total tons of CO2 equivalent per $1 million spent. Okay, so once I do that and I update that selected row, it will change it as appropriate, and then I can just choose save and exit. Okay. So now that this has been saved, we can go in and take a look at what this looks like in terms of from a reporting perspective. So when I click here on my home screen, one of the other dashboards will give me an analysis of my scope 3 value chain as well. So here we can see in terms of the total scope 3 emissions, procurement so far in the current calendar date, and also then break down by those supplier emissions. Again, you can drill into them based upon our various different suppliers and so on. So that's a very quick overview of how we handle the carbon accounting around the different emission types. And we also have another audit dashboard as well, which will allow you to, both from an internal and from an external perspective, take a look at the various different scopes and in terms of greenhouse gas summary, what's been utilized by the business, resource consumption, and so on and so forth. One of the really great things about it is that it allows you to compare year-on-year values to see how your business is performing, how you're improving in terms of your greenhouse gas consumption or emissions, and also what things like the increase in renewable energy that you're using as opposed to less clean sources of data. So hopefully with that, it gave you a good overview as to how Sustainability Cloud works and functions. One of the things in terms of helping to streamline the process is that the loading of the data, again, we offer different options that you can manually come in and make a change, for example, to to one of your carbon footprint, to one of your energy use records. So if I clicked into this record, I can edit it manually. But I can also use the data loader to load in the relevant data as well. Okay, and or also you may build out an integration using something like MuleSoft. Everything that I've shown you today is also available on mobile. So you have this information in the palm of your hand whenever you need it. But the key thing is that you have investor quality type data available and ready to use, and can be shared with relevant parties as well, or external auditors as appropriate. Okay, so now we're going to look at Salesforce.
So thank you so much, Connor. Thank you so much, Maxime. Thank you so much, Arthur. It was an amazing presentation that we had from you. So let's start with our Q&A. So the Q&A is open. So everyone within this webinar, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A that we have integrated within Zoom, and just type your questions and let's bring some ideas to the table. Thank you. We are open to questions. We have a question that is Salesforce Cloud, what emission factors are used? I think this is for you, Connor. What emission factors are used within the Salesforce Sustainability Cloud?
Yeah, so we come with, there's a list of different emission factors shall we say, pre-installed, if you like, but you also have the ability to load different emission factor data sets. Often one of the questions we get asked is in terms of, which scope 3 categories do we cover, because, we have using the EIO data set for scope 3 emissions, which allows you to calculate, it's based upon, tons of CO2 emitted per $1 million or whatever, so the value of that. So we kind of cover 7 upstream and 1 downstream for scope 3, things like purchase goods and services, capital goods, fuel and energy related records, business travel. So that's what's covered. But the scope 1 and scope 2 is using your traditional data sets and we have them done for each country. But again, the ability is you can bring your own data sets, or if you have any additional ones that are provided by your energy suppliers, they can be incorporated into Sustainability Cloud too.
Okay, Connor, thank you so much. There was another question from another attendee that wanted to know if he could have access to the recording. We are broadcasting through YouTube, so you can use our link that I shared in our event on LinkedIn. So you can access right now. You can see that it's broadcasting. So any more questions? Because I have some questions if you don't have any more from attendees. So I'm going to make a question to Arthur and Maxime. From your perspective, what sectors and geographies are leading sustainability cloud?
Okay, so in terms of regions, we know that there are some, I would say, more mature regions that already took some very strong climate pledge. So, of course, Europe has started with this climate pledge by 2050, with a milestone in 2030. But there are other countries, and notably now North America, with Biden's program for and the Green Deal and so on. So in terms of region, I would say that it's quite classic North America, Europe, but also some countries in Asia like Japan or South Korea. In terms of sector, it really depends. What we see on the market today is that, of course, the sectors that have very strong questions and expectations from clients are moving faster. So meaning that when we look at consumer product, retail, distribution, and automotive, for instance, of course, they go faster than other, I would say, B2B sector, like heavy industry or manufacturing and so on. When it comes to, there are two sectors that are very specific. The first is the energy one, energy and utilities, which is extremely specific because I think that is a sector that I would say was a first mover, mainly because CO2 emissions are mainly linked to energy consumption today. And the other sector, which is very particular, is the financial services, so meaning banks and insurance, where the role of banks through investment and so on is absolutely huge. And it's a sector that we see moving very fast today.
Thank you so much, Arthur. Well, we are approaching the end of this webinar. So let me just thank you so much to everyone, to every attendees that we have on both streams here and in YouTube, and hope you see you soon on our next webinars for sure that we are going to do. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. See you later.